1. Starting off, my backyard neighbor has a Chihuahua. We're Canadian. It's cold where I am still, and our winters are harsh. One very frigid, snowy day, I noticed a lot of tiny dogs barking. I looked around out my back window and saw their tiny Chihuahua outside begging at the door to go back inside. I figured they'd get to the door any minute, and I walked away. I continued to hear the barking for like 5 or 10 minutes. I told my mom about the dog being outside, and it wouldn't stop barking for a while. We knew how cold it was, so we waited another 5 minutes before we put on our boots and snow pants and trekked through the snow into their backyard to see if the dog had somewhere warm he was staying, or if he was genuinely left outside with no way to keep him warm. To our discomfort, there was nothing. We walked farther into their backyard, and that's when the Chihuahua turned around and saw us. He was petrified, and his barks to get inside turned frantic and panicked. Which makes sense, as 2 random people appeared out of nowhere. We backed up a bit, not wanting to freak him out anymore, and that's when the back door flew open and all hell broke loose. A middle-aged lady with a smoke in her hand and a towel on her head glared at us for a moment before she screamed, "What the fuck you think you're doing, my dog? Get the fuck off my property, I'm calling the cops." Extremely thrown off guard, my mom shouted back, "Don't have a 4-pound dog outside in -20 centigrade, and we wouldn't have to be here right now." We turned heel and started walking back through to our house while she screamed obscenities at us, and my mom just told her to F off. The dog got inside though, so mission accomplished, I guess. Fast forward a few weeks. It was just finished snowing, and it's the weekend. Our 2 boys are outside playing, screaming and having fun. I look out my window and see them playing in a tree. It's not very big. They're jumping off into a pile of snow. Looks fun. Suddenly, one of the boys' snow pants' buckle gets caught in between the branch that split off like a fork in the road. He's not being choked or harmed, but he's definitely not going anywhere until an adult helps him. At this point, I was invested, as mean as it sounds. The other boy was trying to figure out how to get him free, while the boy tried moving to get out. They weren't panicking yet. Not 5 seconds later, the little boy starts screaming and crying his head off. He's realized he can't get out alone. I do feel bad and contemplate going out to help him before I get reminded of how she treated her dog. I wouldn't doubt she'd yell at me again if I helped her kid, so I stood there and watched him. If she really didn't come out to help in maybe 5 minutes, I'd go grab him, of course. The other boy ran inside to get help, and maybe a minute or 2 later, she's running outside to get him. He's obviously fine, only shaken up. I poked my head out the window and yelled, "I would have helped him, but you said you'd call the cops on me if I went on the property," before shutting my window and walking away. That's my petty revenge. 2. I bought my home in 2001 in a 42-home community. We bought it right after 9/11, and we picked the community because the HOA fees were very low, at just $51. It wasn't long after we bought the last home in the community. We got a sweet deal because of this, and business had already slowed right after 9/11. Before those dues started going up, I was 22 at the time. Looking into the financial reports and into the meetings, it became clear why the dues were going up. The board was a little fiefdom set up by the developers of the homes. Our management company was a subsidiary corporation of the home builder, and the board members were a combination of one of the home developers and 2 of the very first home purchasers in the community. A 3-person board. The first action the board took with that increase in funds was to remove trees that were not even on the HOA's property. They were trees that sat in an area the HOA had access to for weed abatement. These trees' real crime was not that they were weeds, it was that they blocked the nice view of the board's president and vice president. At the same time, the bullshit violation letters started going out to about half the homes. You aren't mowing enough, you aren't watering enough, every petty thing you can think of. They were issuing warning letters and starting to fine homeowners. Cue revenge time. After getting one of those letters myself about weed abatement, Ironically, it was researching the community's CC&Rs about weed abatement that led me to realize the trees that were cut were not on HOA property. And it was researching the annual budget that led me to finding out the huge weed abatement expense was actually the community's funds being spent to remove trees solely for the 2 board member homeowner reviews. I then found out that in California, all anyone needs to initiate a recall of the entire board and install a new one, if successful, was the signatures of 5% of homeowners, delivered to the current board. That's a total of 3 houses in a 42-home community. The board was issued a recall notice not 48 hours after I had found out about the law, delivered to the management company in person. Ironically, the home builder's corporate office was in the exact same building as the management company. You think they would have wanted to not make their association so obvious, but hey, it was 2002. This is also when I found out the management company basically had the entire board in its pocket. Because they dragged their feet with the recall vote, they set it as far out as they could by law, in the middle of the day. Instead of holding it in the community like all board meetings, they set the place at a local park a couple miles away. They thought that they were so brilliant doing this. So me and my wife put together a proxy voting form for the election, and we went to every door in our community. We told them what was happening with their money, their plans to create an architecture committee that would require all homeowners to get approvals for any additions or changes, everything. It took us 3 rounds around the neighborhood, plus a couple of extra visits to the homes that had not answered initially. In the end, me and my wife had 26 revocable proxies for the election. For those unfamiliar with proxies, it basically gave me and my wife the power to cast the homeowner's vote for them, if and only if they didn't show up to the election. The thoughtless board and management company actually made it easier for us to collect the proxies because a lot of homeowners flat out could not make the time and place of the meeting. The recall day finally arrives. The current board members are all there. The management company representative was there, and 8 other homeowners showed up to the meeting, 6 of whom we had proxies for, and which were revoked by their attendance. They opened the meeting and started saying something about, "Oh, looks like a waste of money, there isn't a quorum, blah blah." I then said, "I'm sorry, but we do have a quorum." They're like, "No, you need 22 homeowners here, and there's only 12. The 3 board members, me and wifey, and the 8 others had showed up, and that's when I pulled out the trump card. I dropped all 26 proxies on the bench table everyone was sitting at, and said, "I'm sorry, but there are more than 30 homeowners present," and pointed out the math. After subtracting the 6 homeowners that showed up, we had 20 additional proxy votes that counted for both quorum and voting purposes. They all got wide-eyed, most especially the management company representative. He came over and looked at the forms very closely and compared it against a list of the homeowners. Even the people that were there and on our side did not realize how much work we'd done to ensure the bullshit ended there and now. The recall meeting was opened. The board members voted to not recall, plus their 3 friends that were on their side. The other homeowners present voted to recall, and the vote stood at 6-6, tied. I then stood and declared that we were voting our 20 valid proxy votes to recall the entire board. Recall passed 26 votes to 6. Next vote, who replaces the board members? It ended up becoming me and wifey and another homeowner that had voted to recall and was willing to take the seat. We elected ourselves to the board seats by a vote of 26-6. It was at this point that the management company then stated that Canon Management was immediately resigning as the management company for the community. I then pulled out the HOA's management contract, which clearly stated that either side needed to give 3 months' notice to effect resignation, and stated that we, the new board, accepted their resignation and set an end date for their services 3 months after. The management guy was nuclear pissed off. I, a 22-year-old kid at the time, had beaten them at their game, and I had prepared for their possible quitting shenanigan. We replaced the management company after a couple of months, having had time to find and vet an independent company at about half the cost, no less. Did the same with the gardening services, which was also a home builder affiliated company, also at about half the cost. The old president of the HOA put his home up for sale about a month later, after we rescinded all the old violations and issued a notice to the old board members that we intended to vote on whether they had committed fraud against the association over their weed abatement tree removal action. I still vividly remember walking over to Dale's house, the old president, the day he was moving and giving him a big wave goodbye as he was getting into the car to follow his moving truck. He gave me the finger as he drove out. Definitely one of my proudest moments in life. 3. Background. I used to work for a vegan falafel joint that served a kebab style with different condiments and toppings. Think Subway. The branch I worked at was really supposed to be a takeout place, but you can come in and we had a couple of seats right in front of the counter behind some glass. As such, the place was tiny and easily felt cramped. I was working early shift that day, and I had to come in at 9:30 to start my 10 shift, which wasn't too bad, but still, around 9:50, in come two ladies who were clearly tourists, not uncommon around this area, as it was the nightlife district. We got a lot of stragglers coming in from the night before. They go to seat themselves in front of the counter. Now, those 30 minutes before the shift was crucial to me. I got in the zone and had a method to the madness of how me and my boss prepare for the start of the day. It was a 2-person job, and my boss heard them as they came in. I spoke English, so he expected me to deal with them. As they're about to get seated, I say, "I'm sorry, we don't open until 10. They give me the biggest stink eye and ask, "Well, yeah, but can't we just wait in here until you're ready?" "Lady, I haven't even swept the floor you're standing on, so no. Again, we're not done preparing yet, so I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside." Exasperated, they say something to each other in French. Now, I've studied French for 5 years and interned in Paris before, so I caught what they said. "That's absurd, these guys are bitches. C'est quand ils sont des chiens." Note that there's a masculine and feminine form, and they decided to twist the language in a way to also be derogatory. When I finally let them in, they have that "ugh, finally" look on their face. I go about their business and ask them what toppings they want. They scan the display, and their eyes land on one pan. My boss and I are somewhat spicy guys, so we keep jalapeño peppers for those who like the extra kick. Remember I mentioned the area was for the nightlife district, but also it was sandwiched by the engineers on the other side. As such, we got a fair bit of Indians. They wanted jalapeño pepper. The name was Chili Chili Bell Bell, because the way we sautéed it in its own juices makes your tongue and brain go ding ding ding. I tell them that, okay, now hold on, it's very spicy. They give me that look again, and then say to each other in French, "No, useless. Okay, bitch, game on." I whip out my best Parisienne, which I know is from the same area as theirs, Moroccan Parisienne, commonly spoken in the Forim district. "Attention, mesdames, these peppers are very hot. Peut-être un peu trop piquant." They realize I understood what they said before, instantly change gears and reply, "Oh, that's no problem, we're used to it." With a smile, I say, "Absolutely," and start loading both of theirs with 5 or 6 of these peppers. For context, we're only allowed to put 1 or 2 for customers. Even I can only handle 3. My boss is at the back pretending not to see, but he knows absolutely what I'm doing. I hand over this pepper-stuffed monstrosity to them, clean up the counter a bit, and fix myself a cup of tea. I watch them take the first bite, and see their eyes widen with horror at the mistake they've just done. I sip my tea as not to make it obvious that I'm grinning ear to ear. At this point, my boss is laughing his ass off behind the kitchen windows. I watch them sweat and fume right in front of my eyes and refill their water. In the end, they were champs and finished it all, but not without putting up a good fight. That's what you get for calling us bitches. I guess revenge is a dish best served hot. 4. Before I lived in my current place, I was living with my auntie. She was the main tenant who sorted the bills, and I would pay her a lump sum each month as board payments. In early 2021, she passed away unexpectedly. Naturally, I didn't want to continue living in this place. Bad memories and bearing the responsibility for an entire place alone wasn't feasible for me financially at the time. After speaking with the housing association, I was informed the only way to end the tenancy would be by getting the tenancy agreement moved over into my name. before terminating the tenancy when I was ready to move out. What I didn't know at this point was that my auntie was in arrears on the rent payments. When it came to the point of leaving the tenancy, I had money in savings and just settled up the rent entirely, paying about £500 for my auntie's arrears, on top of the rent I personally owed from living there alone. I then stayed at the place for a few more weeks before closing the tenancy. In hindsight, I probably should have queried the payment, but at that point I just wanted rid of the place. After moving into my new place, I was getting pestered by the housing association, who said I still owed about £300 on the previous house. There was a lot of back and forth before I asked for a copy of the rent statement. It was around this time that I was speaking to people about this money I supposedly owed. I was informed that I probably shouldn't be liable for my auntie's debt as I didn't receive the estate and was not the next of kin. However, there was also an argument to be made that I was liable for the debt, as technically my name was on the agreement and I became the main tenant. With this information in mind, I looked at the rent statement, worked out how much money I owed from the first week after my auntie had passed, and deducted it from my total rent payments made after that point. It turned out I had paid £200 extra, assuming I wasn't liable for the debt. I presented all my working out in a thorough email and sent it over. I didn't hear anything back from them after that, conveniently, and assumed it was all over. I decided not to pursue this as I was sick of being pestered by them, and I wasn't 100% sure if I was or wasn't liable for this money. Fast forward nearly 2 years, I received a letter last month just before Christmas stating that I still owed us £300, and that it would be sent to a debt collector's if nothing was done. At this point I was pissed off. I spoke to someone who was able to tell me for sure that I'm not liable for the debt in this particular situation. So I sent a firmly written email detailing how I didn't owe this money but in fact they owed me, threatened all the evidence, and provided small claims if the situation wasn't rectified soon. It took weeks of me pestering them via phone calls and emails for me to get in contact with a lovely woman who apologized on behalf of the company on how I was treated. She then got the ball rolling, and eventually my £200 refund cleared the other day. This was a particularly satisfying end, because if they would have just left it, I wouldn't have chased it up, and they would have been £200 better off. What a shame. 5. This happened about 20 years ago when our daughter was barely a year old, if that. I and the wife were living in her mother's double-wide mobile home, and just paying the lot rent and power, which was fine for a newlywed couple with a baby. A bit of backstory info is needed here. Mother-in-law had been dating a guy on and off for years, and he was well known in the town as being the town drunk. A small farming and agriculture city right off the interstate of less than 3,000 people. And boyfriend had at least one DUI and at the time could not drive without the interlock device. So he walked, again small city, and went to the bar, got shit-faced and generally walked or got a ride home from someone. Well, on this fateful night, I and the wife were watching TV, baby was asleep in her room, when we saw shadows outside and heard knocking at the door. We quickly concluded that it was the boyfriend knocking on the door, and we ignored him. He stopped the knocking, and we assumed he left. But suddenly he started knocking on the other door, then the windows. It was at this point in time we knew he wasn't going to leave. And we didn't want him to wake up the baby, so I grabbed a cell phone that didn't have service but still worked for emergency and called 911. I told the dispatcher, boyfriend's name, is trying to break into our home at this address. The dispatcher is in a different city, within the same county, around 45 miles away, and his response was, "I know that name," referring to the boyfriend. He sent the city police, 2 cars, and the county sheriff deputies that happened to be hanging out with the city boys. Just as I was calling 911, he opened the door that we had forgotten to lock and tried to come in. He was very drunk and kept saying, "I just want to ride home." We told him to hang tight. We have a ride coming for you. The PD was less than a mile from where we lived, so they were at our home within 2 minutes of the call, and since they knew who he was, they approached them from 2 different locations, and a couple even had their guns out. They quickly grabbed him and cuffed him, and one of the officers asked my wife if we wanted to press charges for breaking and entering, or attempted breaking and entering, since it was her mom's trailer. She declined, but told him to never do that again, and one of the city officers, a woman, told him, "You're lucky you did not wake up the baby, because if you did, I wouldn't care what she said. I'd haul your ass into jail in a second." He kept muttering that all he wanted was a ride home. Can I just get a ride home? So one of the officers asked me if I would be willing to drive him home, and before I could say anything, my wife said yes, but only if he pays. So the officer asked him how much money he had on him. It was $20 or $40, and made him give it to me before telling him he could go. Just never do it again, because they all know who he is and where he lives, and they wouldn't be nice the second time around. So the malicious compliance here, he got a ride home all right, but it cost him whatever money he had left and was scared sober. Or so I would like to think. He honestly did not think what he was doing was wrong, by his own admission. He never tried again, and mother-in-law finally got tired of him and broke it off with him because, as she said, if she had to choose between her granddaughter and daughter or her boyfriend, her granddaughter and daughter are going to win every time. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, episode 218. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Please do hit the like button before you go and share the video with friends and family. Thank you kindly. Now, before I go on, I do have a little shout out to give. And that goes to the author of story number 2, Reddit user Joshi, with lots of E's at the end. So Joshi, I hope I pronounced that right. Thank you very much for letting us use your story, Joshi. Alright, let's see. Let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is, who was your least favorite teacher growing up? I couldn't even tell you this woman's name, but when I was a kid, I remember she was short, she had blonde hair, and my only memory of her is yelling at me because I misspoke something. I misspoke the title of a school workbook. It was like, I had a 4, I said a 5, or something like that. And I got yelled at very loudly for not saying it correctly. Well, after all these years, I've forgotten your name. I've forgotten your face, really, beyond the fact that you were short and blonde. But the one thing I remember about you, and have continued to remember about you all these years, is that you were an angry, nasty bitch. And in the dim, fading recesses of my memories, that is all you'll ever be. Now, my favorite teacher, however, in high school was a guy named Mr. Ferry. He was a great teacher, had a way of just communicating the subject matter to you. I remember exactly what he looked like to this day. A very kind of red-faced, bald man, and on reflection, he was probably a drinker. And he used to randomly jump up and stand on the desk to get the students' attention. Apparently, in his younger days, he used to walk across the desks in the room, so that was certainly consistent behavior. But he was a great teacher, certainly one of my favorites. Although I had a lot of good teachers at school. Interesting how I remember his and most of the others' names, but Nasty McNasterson didn't really stick. Well, I certainly hope she got a lot of joy out of life otherwise, because it certainly wasn't from teaching. Please, if you're comfortable, you don't need to name names. Let me know who some of your least favorite teachers were, or give a shout out to some of your favorites. Why remember the nasty people, eh? I mean, I think my own recollections prove that they're not worth remembering. In the end, they're just detritus in our memories. Please do leave your answers in a comment below. Okay, with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.